Good morning, or actually good noon. I'm Stas Margaronis with the Propeller Club of Northern California, and I want to welcome you to our event today, which is National Security Challenges for the United States in the Pacific. And we have two very distinguished guests with us, Ken MORIYASU, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, formerly Washington Bureau Chief for the Nikkei News Service, and Peter ENAV, publisher of the Taiwan Strait Report, who comes to us from Australia. Correct, Peter?
That's correct.
Very good. Thank you very much, guys. Before we begin the program, as you know, what we do is we do introductions. And so I am going to start with asking my colleague, Todd Crawshaw, to introduce himself. We'll go down for the list of who's here, and then we will begin with Peter ENAV. Todd, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Todd Crawshaw with Crawshaw Design and a proud member of the Propeller Club.
Very good. Ken MORIYASU, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. And could you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, so I'm a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. I have been in this position for 4 weeks now. Before that, I was a reporter for Nikkei, Japan's business newspaper, for 30 years. And I'm brand new as a think tanker.
Very good. Thank you very much. Peter, good morning from California, and good morning to you in Australia. I'm sorry, Peter ENAV, and then we'll get to Peter only, who I see as well. Two Peters. Peter ENAV.
Good morning to everyone in Northern California. I was at graduate school at Berkeley, so it's a part of the world I remember well. I started the Taiwan Strait Risk Report about 3.5, 4 years ago with a fellow called Mike Shinoy, who was a longtime CNN correspondent. I've spent a lot of time in Taiwan. I ran the Taipei Bureau of the Associated Press for about 10 years.
Very good. Thank you very much. Peter Olney, good morning, my friend.
Good morning, Stas. Peter Olney, based in San Francisco. I'm the retired organizing director of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, and I just had the great pleasure of joining Stas in Tokyo for a meeting with the Japanese Dock Workers Union, which he reported on in the Journal of Transportation. So thank you for this forum, Stas.
Oh, you're welcome, Peter. It was a very interesting meeting that Peter convened. We had a chance to talk to the local and the Federation, and we learned a lot about working conditions at the docks in Japan. And some very difficult times are being faced by those guys. They were very considerate. We had a very interesting exchange. And Peter, I want to thank you very much for putting that together. And
you're welcome.
Peter's going to report on that. We have our Maritime Day, a celebration in 2 weeks. And Peter's one of the panelists. He'll be talking about the interchange with the Japanese dock workers. Thank you, Peter. Aaron, good morning.
Yes, hi, Stas. Good to see you again. My name is Aaron Dehart, and I'm the director of the Voyage Performance Services Division at StormGeo, and I love joining the Propeller Club meetings when I can.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you guys all the time. You're a great supporter of ours. Thank you for being with us, Aaron. Jackson Fox. Jackson.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm here in New Orleans today. I'm a 2L at Tulane Law School, studying maritime law. And yeah, happy to be here. Looking forward to this conversation. I studied abroad in Taiwan, speak a little Mandarin, so I'm particularly interested in this topic. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jackson. Kevin Policarpo. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Mr. Stas.
Awesome. Hello to everyone else. My name is Kevin Policarpo. I'm Mr. Margaronis' research assistant.
Thank you, Kevin. Mike Swan.
Hi, Stas. I'm Mike Swan. I'm out of the East Coast here in Connecticut, but I work for Storm Geo and out of the Voyage Performance Department.
Very good. Thank you and welcome. Stephen.
Hi, Stas. Good to see you again.
Thank
My
you.
name is Steve Schlinkert. I'm a assistant manager in the Voyage Performance Department at Storm Geo. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you. Good to see you again. And my good friend, Tony Petronio. Tony, good morning.
Hi, Stas. Good to see everybody. Tony Petronio, Storm Geo Operations Director at Routing Advisory Services Operations Director.
So at some point, we need to have a conversation about how AI is impacting all of the things that you're dealing with. And I know that that's going to be a long subject. And I can see a smile from Stephen over there. So, we need to do something. I think maybe we need to do a Storm Geo AI segment, but I'll leave that for you guys to think about. But something, weather related in terms of what all of the things that are going on, it seemed to me that would be interesting. So
yeah,
I'll leave that to you, boss.
Certainly with weather and ship routing, it's both very, very high amount of applications for both, for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you very much for your support of the Propeller Club, Tony. Did I miss anybody, Todd?
I think you got it ready. I'm not sure. I see. We didn't speak up.
Okay, yeah. If anybody has been missed, would you come on and introduce yourself? Okay. On that note, I'm going to start with Peter ENAV. We had Peter on last year in a segment with several professors from the California Maritime Academy, including the president of the Maritime Academy, then Michael Dumont, who said that he was one problem that he saw was the lack of naval shipbuilding was impacting the ability of the U.S. Navy to be out in the Pacific and to patrol in the Pacific, which now has become even more of a problem since we have the move of the carrier assets from the Pacific to the Iran war front. So on that note, let me get started with Peter ENAV. Peter, you're on first. Thank you for being with us. I know it is very early in the morning for you in Australia, and we appreciate your participation.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you all, and I hope that my presentation doesn't sound too overly pessimistic. I tend to be a glass sort of half empty kind of person, so you should all probably take it with a grain of salt. But I have to say that in looking at Taiwan's future from the different ways that I think one should look at it, it's very difficult to be optimistic. Anyway, the issue that I want to discuss today is does Taiwan have what it takes to resist China's efforts to subdue it? Taiwan's success in maintaining the open-ended continuation of its de facto independence will likely come down to keeping its head above water in four critical areas. The first of these, and arguably the least important, is the quality of its military deterrent. There's little doubt but that China outshines the democratic island in almost every conceivable metric here: air power, sea power, and so on down the line. But Taiwan has the ability to compensate for its gaping military inferiority by enlisting the hands-on support of foreign military forces, particularly those from the United States. The threat of American pushback in the event of a Chinese amphibious invasion of mainland Taiwan or a protracted Taiwanese maritime and aerial blockade is almost certainly the most important factor in deterring China from applying a distinctly kinetic approach to the problem of conquering Taiwan. The second of the four critical areas involves the quality of Taiwan's economic reach. A large part of this comes down to the central role that semiconductor giant TSMC plays in providing cutting-edge chips to end users all around the world. Undermine that centrality, and you will have gone a considerable way toward neutralizing the impact of the so-called silicon shield, Taiwan's ability to leverage its technological prowess in pursuit of crucial political goals. Unfortunately for Taipei, however, that neutralization is precisely what is happening now, not only with TSMC's forced decision to construct a whole slew of cutting-edge fabs in foreign countries like the United States, but also in its newfound vulnerability to crucial LNG imports that the Iran war is highlighting in the Strait of Hormuz. While it remains unclear whether that kind of vulnerability can be transferred to the Strait of Taiwan, it doesn't take much imagination to conclude that China is now working overtime to try to create the conditions to replicate it in its own backyard. The third of the four critical areas is social political cohesion, the ability of Taiwanese society to present an implacable united front in the face of China's increasing efforts to subdue it politically. Here we see some truly profound weaknesses on the Taiwanese side. Taiwanese politics is badly split between those Taiwanese who want to keep China from asserting its political influence across the Taiwan Strait and those who are beginning to believe, either reluctantly or otherwise, that at the end of the day, they will have no choice but to accept some form of Chinese control over their lives. While it is true that Taiwanese public opinion polls continue to show widespread support for maintaining Taiwan's political separateness from China, the facts on the ground reflect a much more China-friendly reality. Arguably, the most important of these is the emergence of the main opposition nationalist party, also known as the Kuomintang or KMT, as a close ally of the Chinese Communist regime's efforts to bring Taiwan effectively to heel. Anyone doubting this need look no further than the election of Zhang Liwen as the party's new chairperson last October. In less than 6 months in office, Chairperson Zhang has already succeeded in bringing the KMT closer to the Chinese communists than at any point since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. To be sure, she does have some formidable opponents within her own party, to say nothing of the governing Democratic Progressive Party, but always assuming reasonable KMT success in the local Taiwanese elections slated for this November, her influence will only grow apace. This will create a situation roughly analogous to Winston Churchill's conservatives sharing the political stage with a pro-Nazi opposition at the time of the Battle of Britain in 1940. It obviously does not augur well for the open-ended continuation of Taiwan's de facto independence. The fourth of the four critical areas, and almost certainly the most important, is Taiwan's ability to maintain its traditionally close military, and political ties with the United States. Here again, the news is not encouraging for Taipei. Even before assuming office roughly 15 months ago, President Trump had already made it clear that he viewed Taiwan as an insignificant blip in the Western Pacific, which had systematically plundered the once thriving American chip industry, even while failing to budget adequately for its own national defense. That negative assessment has now exploded into a veritable tsunami of hostility and indifference. In the first instance, this has been reflected in the continuing refusal of the Taiwanese legislature to pass a government-sponsored measure to increase defense spending by some 40 billion US dollars over the next 8 years. Never mind that it is the KMT, the nationalists, that is putting its foot down here. For the Taiwan skeptical Trump administration in Washington, this is a distinction without a difference. At the same time, it also appears that one of the administration's major Iran war takeaways will be to avoid getting caught up in foreign conflicts far from American shores. Trump's MAGA movement is already up in arms over the higher gas prices caused by the Iranian conflict and other effects that conflict has brought about. Imagine its reaction to a much more deadly reprise in and around the roiling waters of the Taiwan Strait. In and of itself, this probably constitutes the death knell for any significant American participation in a future Taiwan conflict. Combined with the Trump administration's wholehearted efforts to lower tensions with China on a whole range of trade and other issues, it almost certainly means that should China ever choose to move aggressively in and around the Taiwan Strait, it won't have to worry about substantial pushback from the American armed forces in the area. So where does all this leave us going forward? At Taiwan Strait Risk Report, we strongly believe that rather than contemplating an amphibious cross-strait invasion, or even a sustained maritime and aerial blockade of mainland Taiwan, China would far prefer to let the Taiwanese political process do the heavy lifting for it. That is, wait for the island's 2028 general elections in the not unreasonable hope that a China-friendly nationalist candidate in the mold of current party chairperson Zhang Liwen will take over from the pro-independence leaders of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party and so pave the way for eventual Chinese control of the island. To be sure, this is by no means a sure thing. Even if the DPP does appear to be lagging in current public opinion polls, and Chairperson Zhang does have a slight edge in dealing with an expected challenge from a relatively moderate nationalist presidential aspirant, someone like current Taichung Mayor Lu Shoyan, for example, even if she does have this advantage. But sure thing or not, we now believe that most of the prevailing trend lines are pointing strongly in the direction of an early eclipse of Taiwan's 77-year-long political separateness from the mainland, and with it the political integration of its once democratic polity into the Chinese Communist state. For all of us looking on in the West, including those of you in the shipping industry, this will be an event of obviously huge consequence. It is something we should all be tracking with laser-like attention in the months and years ahead. And if I just might add one or two more specific comments about what we should be looking for, I would say in the next year or 18 months, I would not be at all surprised if the Chinese began to do two things to accelerate their so-called gray zone activities. They're short of war activities in and around the Taiwan Strait. The first would be something in the nature of a quarantine of selected shipping into Taiwanese ports, whereby they ask shipping going into those ports to stop first at ports in Fujian province. And they might do the same thing with airliners servicing international airliners and Taiwanese airliners serving major Taiwanese airports, asking them to provide flight manifests before they arrive in Taiwan. My strong suspicion is that the United States does not have a very well-developed strategy to deal with these kind of gray zone activities, and this, I believe, would be the beginning of a very, very slippery slope for Taiwan's political future.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to hold the questions until we have Ken's presentation. A lot to think about, Peter, and a much darker view from you than what we had last January or last December when we spoke with the Maritime Academy. Things have clearly gone from bad to worse, yes?
I reluctantly have to agree with you.
Okay. Ken MORIYASU. Ken, welcome. You're in Washington, D.C., I assume?
Yeah.
And thank you for being with us, Ken, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Stas, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Peter, for a very interesting presentation. I agree with everything you said. For an ally like Japan, your conclusion that it's pretty obvious that the US would not come to a conflict so many thousands of miles away in the defense of Taiwan, this is very worrying to Japan. But just as the US has takeaways from this conflict, I think China also has its negative takeaways from what they're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz. And that is that if there is some kind of action to take Taiwan, that what happens if the Strait of Malacca is blocked by the US Navy? I think with only about 6 destroyers and 1 attack submarine, the US can block the Malacca Straits. And then as the world is suffering from the Strait of Hormuz, China will really struggle to get its energy and trade through the Strait of Malacca. So my theory is that for the last 15 years, the US, Japan, and its allies have been focusing on the wrong theater being the Indo-Pacific Maritime Theater. Since around 2020, the US started to talk about a pivot to Asia, that we cannot be bogged down in the Middle East. We have to pull out of the Middle East and focus on the Indo-Pacific for the rising China. And in 2010, the geopolitist Robert D. Kaplan wrote a very interesting book called Monsoon. And in this book, he talked about how the Indian Ocean is going to be the center of gravity of geopolitics. And if the US wants to stay relevant, it has to focus on the Indo-Pacific, especially the Indian Ocean. And his argument was twofold. One was that the rising next generation superpowers, China and India, would inevitably clash. And that clash would take place in the Indian Ocean. And as proof of this, he talked to the so-called string of pearls policy, where China was investing in the ports, the private ports of Pakistan, Gwadar in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and also trying to invest in new ports in East Africa, so that they would form like a necklace around the Indo-Indian subcontinent and then try to strangle India. So that was his first argument. The second argument was because China depends so much of its energy on these trade routes, maritime trade routes, and all these trade routes transferring oil from the Persian Gulf to China have to go through these choke points, and all those choke points are in the Indian Ocean, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, and it's only natural that the Chinese PLA Navy would be all over the Indian Ocean to secure these choke points. But 15 years later, the Indian Ocean is probably not the center of gravity of the world. If you look at the New York Times today, there is not one single story about the Indian Ocean or the Indo-Pacific. It's all about Ukraine, it's all about Iran, it's all about Gaza. And one of the reasons, there are several reasons for this. One is that China is really not interested in the Indian Ocean. It's predominantly interested in the Pacific Ocean. It's interested in the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, East China Sea. But more importantly and more interestingly, over the past 15 years, China has been moving away from the vulnerabilities of the Indian Ocean because it didn't want to be vulnerable to exactly what we're seeing today, the Strait of Hormuz being shut and not being able to get its energy. So China has been quietly shifting its energy imports to overland energy pipelines. The most prominent is the gas pipeline to Turkmenistan. There is an oil pipeline to Kazakhstan, and there's also a wait a minute. Sorry, my my battery is running low, so I might get cut off, but I'll come back. So they've been moving to the inland pipelines. That's number one. They've also been moving away from oil. They've been trying to encourage all of its people to move away from gasoline-powered cars to electric vehicles. And that electricity that powers the electric vehicles comes from coal or nuclear. Nuclear, they don't need any resources for coal. They can produce it domestically or get it from Mongolia or Russia. So this shift from maritime trade to overland pipelines and also shifting away from oil to electricity kind of protects China from the US Navy. And I think in the future, they will trade with Turkmenistan, trade with Russia, trade with Kazakhstan with the renminbi. And then that would move them away from the US dollar, which will make them free from US sanctions. So I think what China has been doing is creating a fortress in Eurasia, which is insular from the US Navy and also the US dollar, therefore US sanctions. And I think once this fortress is complete, then they will start projecting power outside, and then that is when they will take Taiwan. They could take Taiwan. I mean, technically, they could take Taiwan next year, and America, as Peter said, would not probably come to the rescue. So that would be possible. But I think the US will immediately shut down the Strait of Malacca. That would apply tremendous pain to the Chinese economy. That's why they're not ready to do it now. I think in terms of timeline, it's not 2027, but more to what they're saying themselves, 2049. I think that is the more likely timeline for the Taiwan operations. And if that's the case, from now to 2049, the focus from China's part will be to build this fortress in Eurasia with Russia, with Iran, and with North Korea. So if you put it in that context, I think what Trump and Israel is doing to weaken Iran is very good for US and Japan's grand strategy, because it is taking away the southern leg of this Fortress Eurasia concept. Now, what should the US do to prevent this? I think what will be important is, if you look at China, their pipelines and their railroads all go through Central Asia, and to reach Europe, they have to go through the middle corridor.
Okay, we lost him. His battery is out there. So let me, while he's going to come back, Peter, let me ask you the most important question from my standpoint. If at 2028 a KMT president is elected and there is a Anschluss between Taiwan and China. What does that mean most directly to the United States and with our commerce to Asia?
I think that one way of trying to answer that question is to understand that since the end of World War II in 1945, the United States has been able to operate in the Western Pacific almost as if the Western Pacific were an American lake. There's been a whole there's been a string of American alliances, mostly built around South Korea, Japan, to some extent on and off the Philippines, and the United States, of course. The United States Navy has acted to secure world trade that focuses on the Western Pacific to almost everyone's advantage, including the advantage of the Chinese, because they've been able to move their goods without fear or favor to wherever they want to move them. Assuming the change that I'm pointing towards were to occur, there are going to be a couple of things that precede us, that precede this. Let me just back up a bit and say that everything that we're saying today is almost a little bit premature, simply because we haven't had the opportunity yet to fully integrate the lessons of the Iran war into our thinking. One of those lessons, I think, is that traditional American allies in East Asia are going to be thinking twice about the reliability of the United States. Now, there are two countries in particular, and the other is Japan. I think that the South Koreans, because they are so exposed, they are so dependent economically on China, and because they do not bear the burden of tremendous enmity with China as a result of World War II, I think the South Koreans will inevitably, if I were in their shoes, I would be working towards the acquisition of a nuclear weapon, and I would be trying to make a deal with the Chinese. The Japanese, I think, are not going to have that choice, simply because in China's view, China still has unfinished business with Japan as a result of what happened during World War II. So I think there's going to be a split in the traditional American alliance system in Northeast Asia. That's number one. Number two, we're going to see the projection of Chinese power eastwards, outside of the first island chain, towards the second island chain.
Second island chain means Hawaii, right?
That's correct. I really enjoyed very much Ken's presentation, particularly his emphasis on the fact, because if you want to look at China's vulnerabilities, the kind of strategic framework that I appended to possible Chinese actions going forward is a pretty conservative one. It includes possibly a quarantine, but not a blockade. But anytime you start with this stuff, you know how it starts, but you don't know how it's going to end. So the two Chinese vulnerabilities here are, on the one hand, and we're not going to get into this because this is pretty fuzzy stuff. It's the extent to which Xi Jinping and the Chinese Politburo can rely on the loyalty of the People's Liberation Army. As you may know, Xi has been purging the PLA left, right, and center. But the second one, exactly as Ken points out, is Chinese vulnerability to American economic pushback, which basically involves extending the theater of operations beyond the Taiwan Strait to the Strait of Malacca, so that you basically blockade Middle Eastern hydrocarbons from reaching China. But what Ken is suggesting, and I think he's absolutely right, is that by sourcing hydrocarbons overland, and coal as well overland, you mitigate the American ability to disrupt the Chinese access to Middle Eastern hydrocarbons. The only question I would have for Ken, he imputes a great deal of strategic forward thinking to American policy, and I'm just not altogether convinced that that's the way they're operating.
Okay, let me get Ken back on. And Ken, I want to ask you a question, the same question that I asked Peter while you were gone. Let's assume just for a moment that 2028 happens, there's a KMT president elected, and the KMT announces that they are going to recognize Chinese suzerainty over Taiwan. What does that mean in terms of commerce and trade? And also, maybe if you could talk about what does that mean to Japan? Ken?
Yeah, well, so Taiwan itself, to be a little controversial, defending the island itself should not be the goal of the U.S. strategy. The U.S. strategy is to ensure that China plays by the rules or doesn't try to create a new order where they have a sphere of influence within what they can do what they want. Taking Taiwan is just a symbol of that. So I was trying to say, what should the U.S. strategy be if China's goal is to move inland and to create this fortress in Eurasia? It doesn't mean to replace China as the fortress in Eurasia. America cannot do that and does not need to do that. If you look at China's pipelines and railroads, they all go through Central Asia, they all go through the Southern Caucasus, and all go through Turkey to Eastern Europe. So this is the land corridor. And just like in the maritime corridor, there are choke points. And it's like, for instance, Azerbaijan. If you look at the map, north to south for Azerbaijan, if you want to go from China to Europe, you have to go through one of three countries. You have to go through Russia, you have to go through Iran, or you have to go through Azerbaijan. And if you're in China's position, you don't want to be too dependent on Russia. If Iran is like, there is regime change in Iran and it's more pro-Western, you have to go through Azerbaijan. But within Azerbaijan, on the north, there's mountains, in the south, there's lakes. There's only a 50-mile narrow gap where you can go through. So this is the equivalent of the Malacca Straits of the land. So what America needs to do, and what the Trump administration is doing, is to build a very good relationship with Azerbaijan. There are several swing states, which I call, which America should have good relations with. I name 8 of them: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and Hungary. And by having good relationship with these 8 countries, China has to go through these countries to reach its destinations. And what the American strategy should be is to make sure that China is never fully confident that it has established, or is it nearing the establishment of the fortress. Because like If you take Uzbekistan, for instance, their president, Mirziyoyev, has met Trump 4 times, sat down with Trump 4 times in the past 8 months. That's twice as much as Takaichi's, 4 times more than Lee Jae-myung of South Korea. So the Trump administration really is engaging with Central Asia, engaging with Azerbaijan. The question Peter had was, does this administration have a strategy? I don't know, but just by their actions, it tells me that they have never held the Quad. So their instincts is pointing to the direction in which I'm talking about.
Okay, so let me, first of all, there is, I think that there is a question in a lot of American minds about whether the war in Iran is actually in the national interest of the United States, and whether the withdrawal of forces and the carrier group from the Pacific has emboldened China to be even more assertive in the Pacific, where we directly impact Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, California, not to mention everybody on the Western Mississippi. Plus, there's the small matter of what Peter raised, the supply of TSMC and advanced semiconductors that supply the AI business and also provide a lot of AI support, a lot of semiconductor support for a lot of our electronics. So if there is a takeover or a relationship which consolidates Taiwan under a Chinese flag of some sort, there's an impact here which seems to me to be very, very stark and very immediate. So my question, and the final thing is, your Prime Minister Takaichi, has been vocal about the situation in Taiwan, saying that she thought that Japan and the United States ought to take an assertive role. Although when I was in Tokyo last month, I heard from the Keidanren that they're very concerned about China's restrictions on rare earth elements, and they were hoping to get Takaichi to back off on that and be less vocal on that. So let me, I would like both of you to sort of give me just a thumbnail of what you think about. Ken, you first, and then Peter.
Right. So what the Trump administration, well, not Trump administration, Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, what he has been advocating for is a policy of prioritization, meaning, we should pull out of the Middle East, pull out of Ukraine, so focus on China, to meet China head on, pound for pound in the Taiwan Strait militarily, so that China doesn't get any bad ideas. So that is matching the number of submarines, matching the number of air carriers and destroyers in the Taiwan Strait, because China has a home field advantage. And because America is so far away, it needs allies like Australia, Japan, and the Philippines to step up. And for Japan, this means tripling the defense budget. But as you just said, Stas, Takaichi has been loyally trying to do that and talking about what Japan might do in a Taiwan crisis. This has only emboldened China. So my thesis is, this is what we call military deterrence, trying to match China militarily, and I don't think it's going to work. I think there should be something called geopolitical deterrence, using geopolitics in a skillful way to divert China's attention. And I call it like acupuncture. By using the pressure points, China's weak points, you kind of paralyze their movement. And if you look at the map, their pressure point is definitely Xinjiang. All the energy pipelines, all the railroads, all the highways that China needs to escape the Malacca dilemma go through Xinjiang. So Xinjiang, I think, is much, much more crucial to China than Taiwan. Gaining Taiwan makes them feel good. It is, in terms of the China dream, it's the last piece of the center of humiliation. They would like to get it back to erase the humiliation of history. That I get. But in terms of the strategic value that Taiwan brings, not much. Whereas Xinjiang, it's a third of the geography of the whole China landscape. All the pipelines go through there. Also, the oil and coal that they need for their domestic consumption, they come from Xinjiang. And finally, all the ICBM silos are in Xinjiang. So America doesn't have to invade or encourage independence of Xinjiang, but by teaming with the Central Asian states, which are all Turkic countries, then maybe America, Japan could encourage the Turkic countries to stand up to China in the treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, who are also Turkic brothers. So if there's more tension on that border, that I think distracts from Taiwan. This brings India into the picture, and the reason why I think Japan and India don't see eye to eye in terms of strategy, because if Japan and the US strategy is to distract China on the western border of China, this is not what India wants, because if China is focused on the western border, it will also inevitably focus on the India border. For India, the best case scenario is that China is obsessed with Taiwan, totally focused on Taiwan. That brings the attention away from the India-China border. So that's India's grand strategy, which is totally different from Japan. So this quad of having Japan, India, Australia, US at the same table trying to contain China, it doesn't work because the goals are so different.
Okay. Peter, I'd like you to address the immediate issues like semiconductors for us, our immediate issues, and then Ken has posed that we're looking at the wrong theater, that rather than looking at the Pacific theater, we ought to be looking at the Eurasian theater.
Okay. I think regarding the semiconductor question, one of the main issues right now immediately is, TSMC consumes something like 11 or 12% of Taiwan's overall electricity output, and that's being fed by, to a very considerable extent, by LNG. Most of the TMC LNG imports come from Ras Laffan in Qatar, which was very badly damaged in the early days of the war. So most immediately, I understand that the Taiwanese are now desperately moving to variegate their sources of LNG. They're looking at the United States and one or two other places as well. So there is an issue there. I think that the Chinese understand that TSMC is the golden goose. And it's one of the reasons why their view of trying to assume control of Taiwan emphasizes a political process rather than a kinetic one, because you don't want to destroy that. What I'm suggesting is that in the same way that the United States and Japan and other Western countries would be negatively impacted by any damage that accrued to TSMC, to the fabs in Taiwan are several years ahead of the fabs anywhere else. I think they're down to 2 nanometers. Where you don't find that in their, I believe they have a facility in Japan, and the facilities in Arizona will not replicate that. So the TSMC fabs on Taiwan itself are really the jewel in the crown for them, and I think the Chinese are aware of that, and they don't want to move to undermine the stability of that resource. So I think that in the short to medium term, we're probably okay there. Now, I just find Ken's presentation to be absolutely fascinating. There are a couple of things that that strike me. I've looked at this Iran business, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible, but I see an absolutely shambolic decision-making process in the USG. There's one guy who has these impulses, and everybody else falls into line without really a lot of forward thinking. But let's suspend that disbelief for a moment and focus in on the Xinjiang piece. I've noted that despite the ethnic propinquity between the Turkish states of Central Asia, including Turkey itself, they've really backed away from China's excesses with regard to the Uyghur population in Xinjiang. So I'm not persuaded, at least right now, that a concerted effort by an alliance including the United States and the Turkic countries of Central Asia and Turkey itself would have much impact in Xinjiang, in creating a new front for the Chinese to worry about. I may be wrong about that, and things can change very, very rapidly. I mean, we've seen the transformation of Pakistan into a hostile entity, or at least a negative entity for the United States, into a positive enemy. Some of that may involve some deals that Don Jr. and a guy called Beach Gentry have made regarding the amendations to the Pakistani code regarding cryptocurrency. I don't want to sound too cynical about this stuff, but it is a pretty massive change. Anyway, I think that Ken has given us a hell of a lot to think about. I remain a little bit skeptical about the relative importance of Central Asia vis-a-vis East Asia, but he's definitely opened my mind to thinking about this problem, not necessarily in a different way, but in a wider way.
Okay. Let me open this up for questions because Jackson, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for the presentation. Just wanted to perhaps share a couple thoughts, if I may, and maybe it'll trigger a comment for you, Ken or Peter. So, you made a comment that the U.S. doesn't want China to be able to do what they want. But if you're China looking out right now, it feels to me that the U.S. is doing whatever they want. We're invading and militarizing to the extent that, our own country says it's illegal, whether or not, the ends justify the means. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is you said kind of this 2049, 20-year horizon. I think it's really interesting. I've been following some of the Central Asia stuff you've been posting, Ken, and I think, it raises a much bigger question that Taiwan's really just like this piece in securing China's future. And I am, she has really kind of thinned out the ranks in terms of who his successor can be. And so if we're thinking about ultimately taking Taiwan 15, 20 years from now, I question if the same desire of this nationalist unification is still going to be there. If there's not a lot of young people left in the high politico there. And the last comment is I've read somewhere that Taiwan has a 2 or 3 week energy supply without any exports. So, that seems to me the most obvious way to stop that. So, yeah, there's just some thoughts. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Peter, Ken, you want to make a quick comment on that, and then I'm going to open
Yeah,
up.
sure. 11 days of LNG reserves.
Wow.
That's what they got now. I think if you look at Chinese social media, you see a lot of pressure from the grassroots regarding Taiwan. So I'm not persuaded that over the course of time, the immediacy of the Taiwan imperative is gonna disappear. I'm just not persuaded of that. To me, there must be a discussion in the Politburo with some people arguing that, I mean, look at the guys who are running this country now, they are saying of the United States. We're never going to have it so good. Um, and then there's Xi Jinping, who is a pretty risk-averse guy. So these are the factors that are going to have to be balanced here. But my own thinking is that if Taiwan remains as it is today, by the end of, I would say, 2030, I would be very surprised.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah. So Japan, so the conclusion of what I'm going to say is Japan has no option but to team with the US. So since the end of World War II, Japan has been fully protected by the USA, and it's been a model ally, I think. But it's clear that the US cannot continue to offer the services that it has until now. It cannot afford to be the policeman of the world. So it has to change. So Japan now has three options. It can continue to be with the US, or it could bandwagon with China, or it could take the Mark Carney route, which is uniting the middle powers of the world to be resilient against both China and the US. And what I can tell you, without a shadow of doubt, that in Japan, there is 100% rejection of the Mark Carney route because it's just not viable. Like, what middle powers is he talking about? I think Mark Carney, when he envisions the middle powers, he thinks of the G7 minus the US. So that's Canada, Italy, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, and the UK. That are the wrong set of middle powers. If I was forced to choose the third option and go with middle powers, I would go with my swing states: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, Hungary, Pakistan, and Mongolia. Anyway, then there's the second route, being friends with China. This could have been possible, definitely during the Deng Xiaoping years and the Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao years. I don't think it's possible in the Xi Jinping era. And as Xi Jinping, it looks to be set to be leader for life, it'll be increasingly difficult for anybody around him to offer different options. So Xi Jinping, I think, has the wrong, incorrect vision of history. He has his own very nationalistic view of history. And like Peter said, when they do become the superpower, they will take some kind of revenge on Japan. Japan is not just a neighbor. It's a neighbor with a really bad history, So that is probably not an option, which leaves only number one, teaming with the US. So my whole strategy is, okay, if teaming with the US is the only strategy, how do we make sure that the US stays relevant and powerful without having the American people to burden everything? So, of course, Japan can increase its defense spending and do much more, but I think Japan's role is to advise and coach and steer America in the right direction, teaming with the right allies so that they can stay powerful organically. So like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they're dying to be friendly with America. Why not use that momentum? Azerbaijan also too. So, they might be joining the Abraham Accords. So let's utilize that. Trump is going to host the G20. He's going to invite Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. He's probably also going to invite Azerbaijan. Let's encourage that and make America stay relevant in a way that's not too burdensome on them.
Very good. I'm going to see if there are other questions from our group out there. This would be the time to ask them. I know we've got some Storm Geo people here. Does anybody want to come in here? And I see that, I don't know, Matthew, are you want to say something here? Matthew LaFiandra. Usually.
Hi, Stas.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Always love hearing from both Ken and Peter, who I think have such unique perspectives on the various parts of the world where they specialize. I was really struck, Ken, by your comments around the stands in Central Asia there, and well aware of the geographical strait of the geographical strait that exists going through Kazakhstan. That route has been fairly well established now for some time, and do you think? With the Central Asian countries and with Japan, Mongolia, et cetera, a lot of the countries you mentioned, that the bond or desire to align with the United States is holding, or do you see erosion in those relationships in the face of, certainly the recent Strait of Hormuz action, but also just the last 18 months of frenetic, perhaps schizophrenic U.S. government policy?
Good question. Ken?
Yeah, so I think the Biden administration's values-based foreign policy kind of really limits the partners that America can have. And the reason why Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan have joined the Board of Peace, one of the first countries to raise their hand and say they want to join the Board of Peace is because of Trump, and Trump really doesn't care what you score on the democracy ranking. If you have the geography, if you have the critical minerals, and if you have the oil and gas, he's very welcome. He's very open to dealing with you. So that has been the changing factor, I think. I think it's important that the US doesn't go back to dividing countries between democracies and autocracies, but rather America really doesn't have the luxury of doing that anymore. I think it's important to team with whoever is in the right geography and is willing to team with America.
Okay. I want to just pose one last thing, and that is that back in 1978, if I could go to some history, there was the second Arab oil embargo, and there was a general beginning of a realization that maybe reliance on fossil fuels wasn't such a good idea because they were a commodity that could be restricted. And as a result of that, there began to be a move among the oil companies, Arco, Shell, and others, that started to migrate into solar energy, for example, a leadership position that the United States had because of the space program. And then also we had a very advanced offshore wind turbine program that morphed into other things. That then went with Jimmy Carter having the solar panels on the White House roof. Reagan came in and took them off, and we've been going down that path ever since. Today, we're back with the Iran war, and we're back with the same issues of scarcities that we had back in 1978. And we don't seem to have learned anything, that if we had renewables that weren't subject to scarcities, we would be able to would not have the same problems. Japan wouldn't have the same problem. Korea wouldn't have the same problem. Can give me a last couple of words on that one?
Yeah, so I would expect China making a major. They don't want to be dependent on the Middle East choke points. But so they're going to accelerate wind, solar, nuclear, not because they're nice people, but because that is the key to their security, and that would they think that would enable their dreams to come true.
Very good, Peter. Last word.
Drill, baby, drill, right? The Chinese are so far ahead of the United States in this area. There is a particular ideological strain that impacts on American decision making in this area now. It's possible that it will change after the next election, but the United States is really behind the power curve here. And, the thought you had about, something that happened 48 years ago, and here we are again. I mean, I had the exact same thought. When will they ever learn? Well, not yet.
Okay. Well, guys, when will they ever learn may be the motto for our panel here. And somebody once said, those that ignore the lessons of history are destined to make the same mistakes. So on that note, I want to thank both Ken and Peter for their excellent presentations. We are recording this, so the recording will be made available by Todd probably by tomorrow morning. I will make sure that each of you gets a copy of that. And I am going to produce a short summary of what we've talked about for the American Journal of Transportation as well. I want to say I really am intrigued by Ken's Eurasian analysis. I think it's very interesting, and clearly the Belt and Road initiatives were oriented towards that direction, and they have borne fruit. And we will see whether that goes or does not go. I think the worry from our standpoint in the United States is that we're at risk of having China be the dominant power in the Pacific, and that has implications for the Western United States. It has implications for our trade. It has implications for our relationships with very close allies in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and to a lesser extent to our relationships in Southeast Asia, which we are very dependent on for a lot of trade that has shifted down there because of the tariffs on China. In a couple of weeks, the Agriculture Transportation Coalition is going to be meeting in Tacoma, and I expect that there will be some grim reports about the lack of export volumes in certain parts of the Pacific as a result of the tariffs and the blowback from that. On that note, I want to thank all of you and all of us. It's been a very interesting presentation. The Taiwan Strait report is made available by Peter. He's the publisher. And anybody who's interested, please let me know. He does an excellent job. He did a very cogent analysis about 48 hours ago. Ken, I want to thank you for your good work over at your new digs at Hudson. We continue to rely on our relationship with Japan. And I want to say one last thing, that Prime Minister Takaichi was in Washington while I was in Tokyo, and we had that very embarrassing situation where somebody asked President Trump why he hadn't advised his allies before he went into Iran. And he said, well, the Japanese didn't give us any warning about Pearl Harbor. Why should we do the same to them now? And I thought that was really, really one of the worst examples of a mistaken view of the world by a president of the United States. Our relationship with Japan, as far as I'm concerned, needs to stay strong, as well as with South Korea. I don't know where we're going to go with Taiwan, and the Philippines have been duking it out in the South China Sea without enough support from us. So on that note, we have a very uncertain world to deal with. I'm Stas Margaronis for the Propeller Club of Northern California. Thank you all for being with us. Be safe, and I hope we will see you soon. And panelists, once again, Ken MORIYASU and Peter ENAV. Thank you very much, guys.